and welcome to Lady Dynamite Creates. This is Tiffany, and I'm going to be sharing with you the latest installment of the Retro Repaint series. I'm going to be working on Strawberry Shortcake, and I chose this character specifically because she's been redesigned yet again for a new cartoon. I wanted to try my hand at creating a new look for Strawberry Shortcake that maintains what the original essence of the character was, while giving her an updated look. I took a lot of reference from Studio Ghibli characters, as well as just cottagecore fashion in general when deciding on her overall look. With that said, let's go ahead and get started on the doll. One thing that all of the versions have had in common is the rounder face, so it made the Ever After High doll an obvious choice. I've chosen apple white for my base, and I begin to get her prepped by shaving down her hair with my electric razor. Once I have her hair shaved down to a short stubble, I'm going to plop her down into some boiled water to help soften her vinyl. Once it's nice and squishy, I pull her head off. One thing I've noticed with the Ever After High doll specifically is the plastic right around the neck peg is prone to breaking and chipping, so be very careful. I use my flathead screwdriver to gently scrape down the inside of the head and loosen up all of the hair plugs. I use my needle nose pliers to remove the hair through the neck hole. I'm thinking the hair for this doll was sewn in because there was no glue on the inside of the head, so no sticky mess to deal with. It was nice. I use 100% acetone to remove all of the factory paint. I used to use the flat cotton pads to remove the face up, but recently I ran out and was using some cotton balls I had around the house, and I think I like this better. I feel like I get less fuzz particles left behind afterwards. I give her scalp a coat of pink acrylic paint in preparation for her reroot. I chose this orangish pink color for her hair, and I figured the original character had orange hair, the new character has pink hair, so why not somewhere in between? I've marked off a section that is going to be for her fringe, and I'm filling in that area completely before I move on. I tie this off to keep it separate from the rest of the hair, and then I begin plugging in the hairline. To plug each hole, I'm using about 20 to 25 hairs. I counted up a few of my plugs so that I could see what my average was to tell you guys. If you're using too much hair in the holes, it's going to cause a lot of strain, so you're going to risk ripping up the scalp, so it's better to use too little hair than to use too much. For her part line, I'm completely rooting down the center on one side, and I section that hair off. Now I'm going back in, and I'm going to be rooting down into those same holes, but pulling the hair in the opposite direction. Once I've completed the hairline, the part line, and her fringe, I'm going to fill in the rest of the scalp. I secure the hair with some liquid fusion glue. I just pour some down into the head and then squish it around with my silicone tool. I make sure to touch all the plugs and to use plenty of glue. And now onto her clothes, and oh, what trouble they gave me. Nearly every piece of clothing had to be sewn multiple times. I start off with her bloomers, and I'm going to sew the fronts to the backs with right side spacing along the side seams. I take the two sewn pieces and I put right side spacing, and I'm sewing down the front seam. I always make sure that I iron out my seam allowances flat. This helps create a cleaner look for the garment and helps with later construction. I hem the waistband using a bit of all-purpose glue. This fabric's very thin, and I was afraid that my liquid glue would show through on the final product. Since the waistband is curved, I'm putting in small little clips in the fabric. Doing this will eliminate the bulk and will create a smooth outer edge while maintaining the curved shape once I fold this over for the hem. I fold the seam allowance over and use heat to set the glue. I fold it with right side spacing and sew up the back seam to the marked spot. I gather the leg seam and attach some lace. I flip the bloomers inside out, and then I sew up the crotch and leg seam. I place the bloomers on the doll to check for fit and mark where I need to sew on the Velcro. Then I attach the closure. And here are the final bloomers. I feel like they turned out super cute. Now I'm going to begin working on her underskirt, and I'm first working on the ruffle. I hem the bottom edge of the ruffle, and then I'm going to sew 2 gathering threads to the top. A gathering stitch is just a straight stitch done at the longest length that your machine allows for. My machine does a 5. I gather up the ruffle to roughly the same length as the bottom edge of the skirt, and I make sure to evenly distribute all the ruffling. With right side spacing, I attach the ruffle to the bottom edge of the skirt. I remove the gathering threads with my seam ripper. the ruffle down flat and top stitch it because it kept wanting to flip up. I hem the top edge of the waistband, again clipping the curves so that I get a smoother finish. Nearly every edge of the outfit that needed to be hemmed was curved, so there was a lot of clipping involved. I apply a thin layer of fabric fusion glue to the area that will be hemmed, then I fold over the hem and use heat to activate the glue. Be sure to comment and let me know of different characters you would like to see me do on the next retro repaint series. I always love hearing your ideas. I read every single one of your comments and I always try to reply. I sew 2 gathering threads to the top of the skirt, and then I gather it until it's the same width as the waistband, and then attach those with right sides facing. I use Velcro to make a closure at the top of the skirt. I pull right sides facing and sew up the back of the skirt. And here's how the skirt came out. Pretty cute, I think. Now before I can move on, I do need to make my custom fabric for the rest of the pieces. I take and I prepare a piece of fabric and I give it an initial press to make sure it's nice and flat. I'm using a Teflon sheet to make sure that my heat press doesn't stain the fabric at all. I created my design in Photoshop and printed it up on my inkjet printer onto sublimation paper using my sublimation ink. Once it's dry, I cut my pieces out and I lay them ink side down onto the fabric. I follow the directions that my paper uses for application to textiles, which is 400 degrees for 25 to 40 seconds. But I do mine for 30 seconds to go right there in the middle. Once again, I make sure to put down my Teflon sheet to make sure that my fabric is protected, and then close up the heat press. And now I have my custom design fabric. It is also important to note that this can only be used on polyester fabric or a high poly blend. Now that we have our custom fabric, we're going to get started on her socks. I fold my fabric in half and I'm going to lay my pattern on top of this and trace it out. My pattern doesn't have any seam allowance, so I'm going to be sewing directly on this line. I find that when I'm sewing something so skin tight that it's easier to just mark down where the stitching line should be and sew along that. Usually if you're sewing something that's supposed to fit the doll skin tight, it's a much smaller amounts of fabric, so this just makes it easier to deal with. Once I have it sewn, I'm going to try this on the doll. I'm not going to clip the seam allowance yet because I'm checking for fit, and I'm going to mark areas where I can sew it a little bit tighter. Once I have those areas sewn, I'm going to clip off the excess fabric, and since I'm using a synthetic polyester fabric, I'm going to heat seal the edges so they don't fray with my lighter, and then flip them right side out. This was the only item in the entire outfit that was right the first time. Everything else I had to sew multiple times, but the socks came out right the first time. Now we're going to get started on the overdress, and I'm first going to hem the armholes and then hem the neck hole as well. Now I can sew up the darts on the bodice. I make sure to fold the triangle so that the two lines meet each other. I'm going to be stitching directly on this line. I find to get the most natural transition for a dart, start at the large end of the dart and then sew up to the point. This graduates the transition more smoothly. I trim off the excess and heat seal the fabric. I fold the back over to the front with right side spacing and sew down the side seams. I hem the bottom edge of the skirt using some fabric fusion glue. I apply it in a thin layer and then I clip the curves and fold over the hem and heat set it in place. I sew 2 gathering threads down the top of the skirt portion of the dress, then I tie off one end. I'm taking the 2 top threads and I'm going to gently pull and gather the fabric. I gather this until it's the same width as the bottom of the bodice. I sew the bodice to the skirt portion with right side spacing. Once sewn together, I can remove those gathering threads. Now we're going to work on her jacket. I'm going to sew the lapels to the base of the jacket first, and I'm going to position these with right side spacing and sew along the outer edges. I hem the top and side edges of the collar. With both right sides facing up, I'm going to sew the collar to the base of the jacket along the neck hole. When that's sewn in place, I'm going to glue the hem under and press it in place. And as you can see here, I've already pressed the lapels to make that triangle shape and pulled them outwards. I hem the top edge of the cuffs. I attach the cuffs to the sleeves with both right sides facing up. I fold over that hem and glue it in place just like I did for the collar. Next, I attach the sleeves to the jacket. Now we can close up those side seams and armholes, folding the jacket with right sides facing and sewing those seams down. I take care around the cuffs to make sure that they're in place correctly. I finish the jacket off by sewing on a bottom band. For her shoes, I chose to use my 3D printed round-toed flats, and these are available for sale in my Etsy shop if you're interested. I'm painting the upper part brown and the bottoms black. Once I've applied a couple of layers of acrylic paint, I give them a spray of Mr. Super Clear and go in with my pastels to give them some shading. Strawberry Shortcake needs a little basket, so I've printed her one up and I'm getting it painted as well. For the month of August, my Dynamite tier patrons are going to be receiving a basket and a set of flats as their tier reward. It also gets a spray of Mr. Super Clear, and I go in with my pastels and pencils to detail out the basket. Once I'm satisfied, they get a final coat of Mr. Super Clear to seal in the work. She of course needs strawberries to fill her little basket with, so I've 3D printed these as well, and I'm going to get them painted. I first space them out in a gray color, and then I'm going to do a wash of brown over it, and then I'm going to wipe away the excess. This allows the paint to get down onto those seeds. Now I begin to dry brush some red on top. Dry brushing is exactly what it sounds like. You're using a dry brush that's not been wet with very minimal paint, and you're just quickly swishing it across the surface of what you're painting. I brush a bit of cream up near the stem, and then I begin painting the stems in different shades of green. Once the paint's completely dry, I give them a spray of Krylon Clear Top Coat. I'm really happy with these. I think they're super cute. Now we're going to work on our straw hat, and to make this I'm going to make a base first out of Warbler. I've created a shape that looks like a pizza with a slice missing. I heat this up, and then I'm going to drape it over my form, which just happens to be a golf ball covered with cling film. As I'm heating and draping it over the form, I'm closing up that pizza slice so that it creates a dome. For the brim of the hat, I've cut out a donut shape, and I've made sure that the inner circle is just slightly smaller than the bottom of the dome. I heat this up and attach them by pressing the brim into the inside edge of the dome. Once it's attached, I make sure that I flatten out the brim. I'm using hot glue to apply the braided cord to the hat base. I start in the area where the brim meets the dome of the hat, and I go upwards towards the center of the hat. I wanted to say a big thank you to all of my friends over on Patreon. I really appreciate your support. Deborah Sweeney, Manders, Thury, Amber S., Angel Bookwalter, Angelica, Dollicious, Camille, Kitsy, Stormcrow Studios, Donna Magana, Beck's Mini Studio, OOAK Magpie, Jennifer Medina. If you're interested in becoming one of my Patreon supporters, please be sure to check out the link in the description box below. Once I reach the top of the dome, I cut off the excess, and then I begin working on the brim, and I wrap this all the way around the brim, and once I reach the edge, I start going along the underside as well, because I don't want you to see the warbler. However, I only do the underside of the brim and not the dome. Now to start decorating the hat. I've cut out a strip of fabric, and I'm going to glue that around as a ribbon at the base of the hat. Because hot glue can discolor fabric, I am using my Fabric Fusion glue on this, and I'm just applying a thin layer down. Now I'm going to begin to add some embellishments, and I have fitted it on the doll so that I have an idea of what it's going to look like in the final placement. So I'll begin adding some flowers and some more strawberries that I painted, as well as some other bits and bobs. Now we can finally start on the face up. Here's all the different products that I've used, but a full list is available in the description box. I know I usually start the face up by showing me sketching out that first eye, and then magically the second eye is matched. So this time we're going to be showing me matching the second eye to the first eye. And of course, this isn't because footage got corrupted or anything. This is totally planned. I sketch out her eye shape and her eye creases with a brown watercolor pencil. And for some reason I get stupid and decide that I'm going to try to sketch in her eyebrows too. This was of course a mistake. This is why I always use pastels, is because I do too much erasing and mistakes happen. So, of course, I don't like the shape of these. I go to erase them, and it doesn't erase. I continue moving forward, just ignoring that stubborn pencil marks on her eyebrows. But that's future Tiffany's problem, so we're going to do the eye shapes and go ahead and start blocking in some color with pencil. I fill in her scleras with a white watercolor pencil and then begin adding some pinks and reds to her waterline. Strawberry Shortcake has green eyes, so I start blocking in those colors as well. I'm just using 3 different shades of green in the eyes. And at this point, I've come up with an idea. I'm going to try to strategically remove those stubborn marks with some acetone, very carefully. Because I decided to do this, I avoided putting any pastels on this layer. I get her coated with another layer of Mr. Super Clear, and I begin on layer 2. Because I do plan to do some pastel work now, I'm going to be applying a layer of colorless blender. This makes the pastels apply easier and have smoother transitions. I first begin layering my pastels with a color that's just slightly darker than her skin tone, and then I begin to build up color more and more in the areas that should be darker. Now, in the way that works best for me, I'm sketching in her eyebrows. I apply a general shape with my pastels, and then I clean it and refine it with my eraser. This actually brings up a really good point, because the things that work well for one artist may not work at all for another. There are some artists that can just draw on eyebrows beautifully with their pencils. I'm not one of those artists. Just like this didn't work for me, the way I do things may not work for you, so just look and see what works best for you. Same thing with my layer count. I used a lot more layers when I was first starting out than I do now, but I was using lower quality products, so I was having to do more layers to build up opacity, and I would spray and save my work pretty often because I was always worried about messing up something I've done already. I do like to leave this in my videos though, because for me personally, I like to see how far artists take their dolls before sealing for another layer. Now that I've built out some of the shading and eyeshadow on her face, I'm going to be adding some details to her eyes. This is probably one of my favorite things to do on a face-up, because I love seeing the eyes transform from just flat color into something more. I darken up her eyeliner, and then I'm using some pastels to add in some cast shadows from the eyelid onto the eye. I like to use Payne's Gray to do my shading of my eyes because shadows are inherently a blue hue and the Payne's Gray is a gray blue. I use a brown watercolor pencil to define the creases and shade some areas of the face. I add some defining lines and details to the lips. I'm using mainly neutral tones because I want her to have a natural look. I detail the creases in the ears, and then I blush the tips of them with the pink, and I also apply the same pink to her cheeks, forehead, and nose. I apply another coat of Mr. Super Clear and get started on layer 3. Anytime I spray the doll with Mr. Super Clear, I'm making sure that I'm wearing a vapor respirator. I also hold the doll 8 to 10 inches away from the can when I spray, and spray in short spurts. If the doll looks wet when you're done spraying, you're spraying it too heavily. Spraying too closely or too heavily can actually cause the Mr. Super Clear to not build up that tooth that's necessary to draw on the doll. I let the layer cure for 30 minutes before I begin any work. I add in some white highlights to the face, and now I'm going to start adding in her freckles. The first pass of freckles I do with just pencil dots right across her nose because I want that to be a concentrated area. I take some thinned down watercolor and begin to spatter that onto the face with a bristled brush. I use my Q-tip to pull up some of the paint and lighten some areas. I begin to add the eyelashes, and I'm using quick flicks. I'm also lifting the pencil as I draw the line so that there is a natural taper to the lash. I do another pass to darken up the lash line as well as the base of the lashes. I finally use some white gouache and add in her catch lights as well as some highlights to the waterline. Now that the face-up's complete, I'm going to be sealing it with some layers of Mr. Super Clear. I normally only seal with 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear, but this time I'm using 5. I'm going to be pouring boiling water over the front of her face to help tame her fringe. The boil wash helps set her fringe into place, as well as reduces the poofiness left over from the reroot. With the hair still a bit damp, I'm going to start trimming down her fringe. I trim this a little bit at a time because you can always trim more if you need to, but you can't get hair back once it's cut. Once I'm happy with the length, I'm going to be taking my scissors and making little vertical cuts up into the hair itself. This will give the edge a more natural look. I roll up a piece of cling film and then place this underneath her fringe. Then I'm going to sandwich another piece of cling film on top and leave that to dry overnight. The next day I remove the cling film and I get it ready for styling. I dampen the hair so I have a little bit easier time handling it and putting it onto the curlers. And once I have all of the hair curled, I'm going to be doing one more boil wash. However, this time I'm going to avoid the fringe. Once the hair is completely dry, I can remove the curlers. I run my fingers through the hair to separate out the curls, and then I take another pass and clean up any curls that seem to be a little bit wild or too thick. And with that, she's done. I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and if you did, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. I have to say, this has probably been my favorite project from the Retro Repaint series. I really enjoyed giving Strawberry the updated look that I felt she deserved. Strawberry is available for purchase on my Etsy shop, so if you're interested, please check out the link in the description box. And remember, always be creating!